first thing for this recipe that we need is some flavored stock, and this is gonna be kind of like the foundation for the whole dish. You could use chicken stock or beef stock if you'd like to, but I wanna keep this dish vegetarian, vegan, so I'm using vegetable stock. And to kind of add more flavor to it, I'm using ½ an ounce of dried mushrooms. You can use porcini, you can use shiitake, you can even use morels if you want to, but all we're gonna do is kind of warm the stock up, throw the mushrooms in. I'm just gonna set this off to the side. The next thing we're gonna do is actually heat a pot, just a little bit of olive oil. And this is gonna be to fry some tarragon leaves. So usually tarragon is an herb that's kind of got like a licoricey, fresh flavor, and it's usually only, served raw, but I'm gonna fry it today. It gets really crispy. I'm gonna take about 3 or 4 sprigs of tarragon and lay them in some olive oil while it's heating up, and you'll see that the leaves kind of start popping and sizzling. You'll see also that the tarragon leaves kind of go translucent, and that's when you know that they're ready. The smell is really fantastic. It smells very licoricey. These are ready, so I'm gonna go ahead and take these out now. You just wanna let them drain just briefly, and then back to the paper towels that I had them on before. So the next thing I'm gonna do is prep my mushrooms. So here I have some oyster mushrooms I've kind of broken off into their little petals. I have some kind of small shiitake mushrooms I've taken the stem off of and kind of cut those in half. And then I have a king oyster mushroom here. So I want about 8 ounces of mushrooms total. Cut the king oyster 4 into quarters, like lengthwise, and then kind of cut it into big chunks. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna brown these mushrooms, and these are gonna kind of be, along with the eggplant, kind of the meat of the dish, even though there's no meat in this dish. And I'm gonna add all the mushrooms into the oil. And pretty immediately you want to then season these with salt and pepper. When making stews like this, it's really important to kind of season along the way, so you want to season every single bit. So these are gonna kind of like saute for about 8 or so minutes, and I'm gonna stir them every once in a while just to kind of like get them going, make sure they're browning pretty evenly. And so while that's happening, I'm gonna prep the rest of the ingredients for a stew that I need. So the first thing is eggplant. The kind of inspiration for this dish is a stew that I actually had in Paris over the summer, where we went to a restaurant and they served a beef bourguignon style stew, but it was large chunks of eggplant instead of beef, but it had all the traditional components. So I really wanted to try to recreate that dish here because people think that vegan, vegetarian food has to be kind of, salads or boring things that can't be based on meat dishes, or it has to have like fake meat. But this is a great, warming, comforting stew that has no meat. It's just all vegetables. And so what I'm doing is I'm cutting these eggplants into kind of like 1.5 inch to 2 inch chunks. So now I'm gonna stir the mushrooms just to make sure that they are browning evenly. So give them a stir and even them back out. Next, I'm gonna do is I'm going to prep the aromatics that go into the stew. So this is like a medium onion, and we're gonna do just one of them. You want 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch, but also this is like home cooking, so don't get too caught up on it. It doesn't need to be perfect. And then do the same thing going the other way. And you see I've also cut about 2 medium carrots and about 2 stalks of celery in the same way, but you want them all around the general same size just because that's the best way that they'll cook together. Now I'm gonna go back and stir the mushrooms just with this kind of like nice kind of like golden brown sear on a couple of the sides, where you kind of tell as you're stirring that they're kind of like crispy, and a lot of the moisture is kind of, it's been cooked out, and these are perfect. So now I'm gonna take them out because we're gonna build the rest of the stew on top of the mushrooms, and we're gonna add these in later so they don't continue to cook with the rest of the ingredients in the dish. So just take a slotted spoon, just kind of pull the mushrooms out. And so one of the things that's kind of untraditional with this recipe for a bourguignon is these are kind of the mushrooms that would usually be added towards the end with the rest of like the pearl onions and all these kind of garnishes, but we're not gonna do the pearl onions, we're just gonna do the mushrooms, kind of keep it focused on being a mushroom and eggplant dish only. So now that the mushrooms are out, we're gonna turn the heat to about medium, and then add a little more oil. This is gonna be about like 1/4 cup of oil, which I know like sounds like a lot, but as anyone who's ever cooked eggplant knows, they absorb a lot. While that's warming up, season the top side of the eggplant, just a little salt and pepper. And you wanna add the eggplant to the oil, season side down so they get a nice sear. And this is about 2 pounds of eggplants, so when cut into pieces like this, you should be able to get them all in the pot in an even layer. Might be a little bit of crowding at the end, but that's not too bad. All those are gonna go and they're gonna sit there for about 3 to 4 minutes until they get kind of nice golden brown, just like the mushrooms on one side, and then I'll flip them over and cook the other side too. Okay, so now the eggplant has been cooking for about 5 to 6 minutes total, and it's done. So now, while our pot is still hot, we're gonna add a little more olive oil, and this is gonna cook all the onions and the carrots and the celery. So about 2 to 3 tablespoons in there. And now I'm gonna add all the onions to the pot, along with all of the celery and carrots as well. So once all of the vegetables are in the pot, I'm also gonna season them with salt and pepper as well. Again, seasoning every layer, every time we add ingredients into the pot. And as you're stirring, and kind of the vegetables are giving up a lot of their moisture, you kind of want to scrape the bottom of the pot as well, just to make sure you're getting up all those kind of bits from the mushroom and eggplant. We're gonna let these cook for about 10 to 12 minutes. Now we're gonna add the garlic and the tomato paste. I have about 6 cloves of minced garlic. I had quite a lot of garlic. It's gonna cook down and become sweet once the dish goes into the oven. And at the same time, I wanna add about 2 tablespoons of double concentrate tomato paste. And this is also gonna give it a lot of like kind of rich flavor. So I just pipe straight from the tube. Just do 2 tablespoons. And just cook it for about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so now that the kind of tomato paste is caramelized a little bit in the oil, and you kind of see the oil is turned kind of like an orange golden color from all that tomato paste. Now it's time to add the wine. And this is the difference between a regular beef stew that maybe uses canned tomatoes or a Bourgignon, which is a red wine based stew. Typically a beef Bourgignon uses entire bottle of red wine. We're just gonna use about half, which is about 2 cups. So once everything's combined, we're gonna bring this back up to a simmer, and we're gonna let the wine reduce by about half. That really condenses the flavor, and that gives the stew a lot of extra flavor where, you know, there's no meat to give it that flavor. So we're gonna go back to those dried mushrooms that were in the stock before. What we're gonna do is we're gonna chop these up and add them to the stew. So they're not going anywhere. And they've given their flavor up to the stock, but now we're also gonna chop them up and add them to the mix. I'm just gonna give them a rough chop. They go in just like that. And continue to kind of let this simmer until the wine's reduced by about half. Okay, so now this is reduced by about half. I'm gonna pour in that vegetable stock that we soaked the dried mushrooms in before. I'm gonna slowly add it because there's a lot of like sediment from the dried mushrooms that whenever they reconstitute kind of floats to the bottom of the pot. And then you'll see at the bottom, there's a mushroom a little bit, but there's also a little bit of grit. So just don't add that. Bring this up to a boil, and while it's happening, I'm gonna add back all the eggplant into the sauce. And this is what they'll cook in and kind of absorb all that flavor that we built before. Arrange the eggplant in the sauce, just like you would if you had, you know, browned off some beef. And you'll see it'll kind of bob around, so don't worry if they're not all facing up. Take all your mushrooms from before as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna add 2 bay leaves and 8 sprigs of thyme. Once this comes to a boil, I'm gonna clamp on the lid, and we're gonna put this in a 350-degree oven for about an hour until the eggplant is really tender, the sauce is reduced down, and you have a really great eggplant stew. Okay, so the eggplant stew has been baking in the oven for about an hour, and you can see it's kind of like reduced down a bit. The eggplant's super tender. I'm just gonna check it with a knife just to make sure. Knife slides in easily. Take out the thyme and bay leaves that I added before, because they've kind of given up their flavor. We don't need those anymore. And now I'm gonna take the eggplant pieces out because I want to kind of reduce the sauce further, and you don't want them to fall apart. Because that skin, they're not gonna fall apart on you, so kind of just take your time, kind of putting them to a plate. And as you can see, the sauces, the kind of like all the liquid that we use to cook the eggplant in, it's kind of soupy, and honestly, you could eat it just like this and that would be great. But what I'm gonna do is thicken it with a slurry. So I'm gonna put the pot back on the heat and kind of bring it up to a simmer because you want to simmer the flour and oil mixture. I'm gonna do about a teaspoon of olive oil with 2 tablespoons of flour. Kind of stir these together until they make kind of a thick paste like this, just as long as you don't have any kind of like dried bits. You want it to look just like that. And then just gonna add this straight to the bubbling liquid. And then just kind of give it a stir. And then as the kind of oil melts and that paste kind of melts and breaks apart, the flour will kind of thicken in the simmering liquid, and that will give the sauce a really good, like nice, thick, kind of velvety feel to it, which is what you want because, you know, typically in a beef bourguignon, you have all the collagen and fat from the beef, and that kind of gives it that lip smacking flavor. You don't really have that here. So this is gonna kind of also add a little bit of that richness and that kind of thick texture to the sauce so that it coats the eggplant pieces really well and makes a nice, delicious sauce. So now this has been simmering for a little bit. As you can see, the sauce is much thicker and you can even kind of hear it. It feels like, you know, a thick liquid is bubbling. I'm gonna add all the eggplant pieces back to the sauce. You can kind of slide them all in, just like that. And you know, we've been working all this time to kind of really build all these like deep, rich flavors with the tomato paste, browning the mushrooms, searing the eggplant, reducing the wine. That's a lot of intense flavor, and that's what we want, but we also kind of want to brighten it up a little bit. So I'm gonna take 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. You could use lemon juice if you want to. Other vinegars, apple cider vinegar would be great. Since we have the red wine, I want to add a little red wine vinegar. And all this does is just kind of brighten up the whole thing so it's not super like kind of dark and murky. Just want to stir that in just a little bit. Again, it's like adding lemon juice at the end of like something grilled or long cooking. It just kind of wakes it up a little bit. You could put this over rice, you could put this over roast potatoes. I really love couscous, things like that. But the way I was served it at the restaurant is just on a plate as it is, a couple big chunks of the eggplant, a little bit of the sauce all around. And then coming back to our tarragon over here, as you can see, once it's cooled, kind of pick up a few leaves, just kind of break them up, kind of scatter the leaves over the eggplant. It's kind of a different non-parsley garnish, a little crunchy as well. And that is a really simple version of beef bourguignon with eggplant.